Welcome to the NBA 2K G League show. I'm your host, Varun Charya, and welcome to the show. So, how does the Mark Walters purchase of the LA Lakers affect the South Bay Lakers? Also, does South Bay have the number one pick in the G League draft this year? We will break it down. So, let's get straight to it, guys. So, first things first, the sale. So, we obviously know that Dodgers owner Mark Walters has bought the LA Lakers for $10 billion. Does that really affect South Bay, though? Well, here's how I think about it. I think about it in two ways. Facilities of the Lakers could get better. If the LA Lakers facilities get better, I wonder how much an effect that could really help with South Bay. Because remember, South Bay does use the same facility for their games as the LA Lakers. That is where they play at UCLA Training Center. That is where they do play their games. So it is something, I'd be curious to see, like, how does that actually impact South Bay? If you do get better facilities, does that bring in potentially more G League free agents, especially notable G League free agents who might have been former NBA players who are trying to get back into the NBA, who, maybe they're like, seeing that the South Bay Lakers and the LA Lakers, like, the facilities are better. I mean, that could just be more enticing. Because remember, there's still the same umbrella. If the Lakers like a certain player and they bring him to South Bay, they're just connected to the organization overall. I mean, they're getting similar facilities. It's a good opportunity when you're investing in the Lakers facilities that even that could potentially help the South Bay Lakers in that regard too. Another thing too, that I think is really important, and I think this is a key thing of how this overall affects the South Bay Lakers. When you bring in a new ownership, that always potentially could change the front office, and that could also change the coaching staff. So, if Mark Walters gets rid of Rob Pelinka and, ends up maybe moving on from JJ Redick, that could also affect the South Bay Lakers front office and their coaching staff, because it is connected. I mean, so JJ Redick then hired Zach Guthrie. So let me talk really quickly about Zach Guthrie. Zach Guthrie, as his first year as a head coach, he's been part of different organizations over the past years. I know he was an assistant coach with the Wizards, and then he came over to the Lakers organization last year, helped with Bronny's development. He did a really good job, especially with all the injuries that South Bay had during their season last year. Zach Guthrie did a great job as head coach. But if JJ Redick is no longer the coach, I mean, Zach Guthrie could be gone. And so this is ultimately how I think this could affect the team. I think if they ended up going a different direction with the main Lakers front office and coaching staff, that ultimately does have the ability to impact South Bay in that regard. Let's also talk about some other questions too going into this season. What does Bronny need to focus on in year two? Now, does he even play in the G League this year? My thinking is, if you look at a recent podcast or interview with Nate McMillan, who is one of the top assistant coaches with the Lakers, he had actually talked about Bronny's development and saying that they really do hope that he can be ready to play more this year. I think he's going to play potentially more. I mean, if you look at Marcus Smart's injuries over the years, if he does get hurt, Marcus Smart, could that potentially open up an opportunity for Bronny? I think it could, and he's made a lot of progress in the G League. I've seen a lot of growth. I've seen him play a couple times in person now, and I've seen him grow a lot. And to be able to see his development has been awesome. As just like a fan of the G League, that's like what I want as a fan, is like seeing these guys get to the NBA. And I think he'll play a few games like from time to time, because I think he's going to be spending a lot more time with the Lakers. And so hopefully he is focusing more on, being a defensive player, making the right reads. I think his conditioning is something he's talked about. He's working more on too. It's just getting himself ready to be playing more NBA consistent, type of minutes. And, I think he is really trending the right direction. I was actually really high on Bronny last year. I actually, in my mock draft, had him going in the first round. I know a lot of people obviously, thought he should have been drafted and gone in the second round, but I actually thought he had a lot of really good tools as a player, and I'm still really high on him. So I hope he has a good year. Let's see what ends up happening. But some other important things. Let's talk about their draft picks here. So South Bay Lakers draft picks for the upcoming 2 seasons. So they do not own their first and second round pick for this year and next year. I'll kind of get into what happened actually just past week for next year's picks in a second, but this upcoming draft pick. So they had 3 first round picks that they have acquired. So now one of those picks, I cannot for sure say if that is going to, which out of the 3 is going to the Motor City Cruise, Detroit Pistons G League team. But here's the most important thing. I believe the South Bay Lakers do have the number 1 pick in the G League draft. My thinking is this. So the way, if you don't know how draft picks work in the G League, is there's no lottery. It's just worst team gets the number 1 pick all the way to the best team getting the least best pick. So the worst team last year was the Iowa Wolves. So they would have had the number 1 pick, but they traded for the returning rights of, I believe, Skylar Mays, who's a former Laker, shout out. They try to get for his returning rights from the Westchester Knicks, who then traded the returning rights for Damian Baugh, which is how that number 1 pick has landed to South Bay. Now, I know there was another trade where they actually trade for Cole Swider. And Cole Swider, who, if you remember him from the Lakers Summer League team, was a great player. He had a good showing in Summer League this past year, but he's actually gone overseas. But they actually had to trade for his returning rights because he was a 2-way contract player for the Detroit Pistons. He technically was able to come back just so they could then trade for his rights. And so they did trade a first round pick out of one of the picks they have currently, which is the Mexico City Capitanes first round pick. That was a pick they got in the Luis King trade in 2023. They also have the Iowa Wolves first round pick, which I just talked about, the number 1 pick potentially, and the Rip City Remixes first round pick, which they got from the Demoy Hodge trade. If you remember Demoy Hodge, he played for the Lakers in the 23-24 season on a 2-way contract. He was reacquired by South Bay, but really just to be traded to the Remix, and they got a first round pick. So one of those 3 picks is going to the Motor City Cruise. I would have been shocked if in February of this year, if this past February, when they got Cole Swider, Iowa was one of the worst teams in the league. And there was only 1 more month of the season left. So for me to think that they would have traded the number 1 pick, it just doesn't make sense. For Cole Swider. I think they also traded the returning rights of Chris Sylvia, I believe, but it just wouldn't have made sense at the time. I think they do have the number 1 pick. And so now here's why I think is really important and what I'm about to get into. The Lakers have signed 4 affiliate player spots to the South Bay Lakers. Now, an affiliate player, if you don't know what that means, that is typically guys who go undrafted or don't have G League rights, and the NBA team during training camp signs them and then is able to bring them onto the G League team. This is also how those guys get the Exhibit 10 bonus, which is typically about $85,000 to stay with the G League team for 2 months. So they've filled all 4 of their affiliate player spots. So the 4 spots are RJ Davis, Arthur Kaluma, Eric Dixon, and Augustus Marcelunas. They've signed 4 guys. Now, Julian Reese, there was initial reports that he agreed to an Exhibit 10 affiliate player spot, but that has not actually been the case anymore. And I'm very curious if Julian Reese doesn't get an affiliate player or an Exhibit 10 spot with a different NBA or G League team. Does he then enter the G League draft? Does South Bay draft Angel Reese's brother with the number 1 pick? So that's just something I'm very curious about as we kind of get closer to the G League draft, which is end of October. Obviously they could always go after another guy. They could trade down if they think Julian Reese will still be there. They did a similar thing last year with Sean East II, where they didn't end up coming to an agreement. I don't know if it was the Lakers didn't have enough affiliate player spots for him to be able to then sign Sean East II, who's a player from their summer league team last year. So then they actually got him through a draft last year. So I think I'd be curious to see if they do a similar thing this year with Julian Reese. And so that's why I think it's important, because again, you're only allowed 4 affiliate player spots, and so that I think is huge for being able to bring in guys for the roster that way. It is important to note that now the Lakers signing these 4 affiliate player spots, if they sign one more player to a 2-way contract that is not one of those 4 guys, they cannot bring back those 2-way contract players if they're cut during the season and for them to return to South Bay. That is one challenge because you can only bring in one in-season affiliate player who is on a 2-way contract. And you if it's 4, I believe, then they're not going to be able to bring that player back. And remember, you can only bring back one. So the 23 to 24 season, they brought back Alex Fudge over Demai Hodge. This past year, they brought back Quincy Oliveri over Armel Troy. So they can only bring one of those guys. And so, a similar thing. I mean, if the LA Lakers sign, one of those 4 affiliate player spots, which I do think they're going to probably have one of those guys on a 2-way contract to start the regular season, then they can only bring back either Chris Mannon, Christian Koloko, or one of those 4 as an in-season affiliate player. Obviously, there is pros and cons to whatever decision they make, but it is something I think to really keep in mind and look very closely at how they monitor that last 2-way contract spot. And I think that, going into returning player rights they own, Kyler Kelly is a guy they just recently signed and are bringing back to their G League team, so I think that's huge. I think a guy like Quincy Oliveri, who did play for Nets Summer League team, I'm going to be curious to see if he has any G League offers anywhere else. Be able to trade Quincy Oliveri could be a way to get maybe returning rights of a different player or trade for some draft capital. I think there are some guys here like Stanley Johnson, who, is more, when he plays in G League, I think he will play more for the California teams like Stockton or South Bay because he lives there, he's from there, to my understanding. So I think that is also an important thing to keep in mind when it comes to trading for his returning rights. But maybe like a guy like Alex Fudge, who's been with South Bay the past 2 seasons now, maybe they do trade his returning rights and he goes to a different G League team. Now, I do want to mention a recent trade that just happened this past week with Jarron Cumberland. Jarron Cumberland has been with the 76ers G League team, the Delaware Bluecoats, for the past 3 to 4 seasons. He's a huge vet with the South Bay Lakers. I really think, and I really am going to say this, you have to have good vets on your G League team. Okay, because if you have a guy like Adu Thiero, the LA Lakers draft pick, spending a majority of his time with South Bay and not really a lot of time with, the main Lakers, you have to have good vets on your G League team as well. Jarron Cumberland is a great vet. He's a guy who won a G League championship. He's played overseas. He's also a great, point of attack defender. I think he's going to be actually a good potential option that if the Lakers do need to bring in extra depth, like say, Marcus Smart gets hurt or other players. I mean, they don't have Dorian Finney-Smith. I think Jarron Cumberland, if he really does well, maybe give him a shot. He could still technically sign a 2-way contract also. So I really do like the idea of them trading for him. I thought that was a great move by South Bay's front office. Bringing a guy who can mentor these rookies, mentor Adu Thiero, potentially maybe help the LA Lakers if they really need injury depth, I thought was just a great move. And this is why you trade for draft picks, because if they didn't have the draft picks that they had and they only traded the ones they had currently, those 2025 first round picks, they would have been in trouble. They wouldn't have had a lot of draft picks. It would have been harder to do trades. And especially with Jarron Cumberland being with Delaware so long, they had to trade next year's 2026 first and second round pick for the G League draft. And so if they didn't have those picks or they didn't have these first rounders, that would have been harder for them to complete the trade. Thankfully, they were able to pull it off. And Jarron Cumberland, I will assume, obviously because they just trade for only his rights in the 3-team trade this past week, will join South Bay Lakers. So let me read his G League stats from this past season. I thought he had some good numbers with the Delaware Bluecoats. Jarron Cumberland this past season, in 32 minutes and 25 games, he had 19.6 points per game, was shooting 46.1% from 3. He had 4.7 rebounds, 5.2 assists, 1.4 steals, and almost 1 block per game. Those are great numbers in my opinion, and I really am excited about this move. Similar reminds me of how the Lakers went after and got Jordan Goodwin, who ended up being a great player for them later in the season. Maybe this is truly another thing where the Lakers signed 2 young guys on two ways to start the season, but then they target, some guys who are more older, who are maybe ready to, who had probably played in the NBA this past year or the past few years, and they then target them on two ways. That's kind of what they've done. I mean, they did that with Skylar Mays, Harry Giles, Trey Jemison, and Jordan Goodwin. So it could be a similar situation. I guess we'll see. But I think that's pretty much it for this video. So let me know what you think about the Lakers off season for South Bay. It's gonna be a really interesting off season and kind of getting right for the G League season soon. So I'm really excited. So let me know your thoughts down below, and if you watch this video, feel free to subscribe, like, or dislike, because hey, you do you. So this is the NBA 2K G League show. I'm your host, Varun Chari, and peace.